Today's video is all about thyme.
I know a bank where the wild thyme blows, where oxlips and the nodding violet grows, quiet over-canopied with luscious woodbine, with sweet musk roses and with eglantine.
When I proposed the absurd idea that we ought to grow a bank of thyme because we hadn't enough to fill our thyme needs, my concern was met with blank and somewhat confused stares. The ever-practical pixies pointed out that we had a full bucket, several pots, and a bed which housed a thriving thyme plant. How I could possibly imply there was not enough thyme was simply mystifying. Thyme is very important not just to meet our culinary needs, I explained, but we also dry it for things like Italian seasonings and herbs de Provence and salad dressings, etc., as well as making tinctures and cough syrups and creams with it. They were unimpressed. Surely we had enough thyme for all my mini projects, according to their quick pixelated calculation. But the taller folk already knew there's never enough thyme. Still, as far as the golden pixie could tell, if wealth was counted in thyme, we were very well off. Sadly, this is not the case, so I tried a new approach. You know, I said casually, the Germans and the Danish believe fairies are drawn to live and play around the thyme plants. The pixies, who have both German and Danish ancestry, immediately changed their anti-more thyme stance and warmed to the idea of more of the herb, deciding that an entire garden devoted to thyme was a necessity. Plans were promptly devised, and the warrior pixie set to work bringing the vision to life. Meanwhile, the dark-haired pixie and her golden companion set about attempting to acquire all the thyme. The golden pixie reasoning, if some thyme was a lure to fairies, then more thyme should make their potager irresistible. This was a pixelated leap of logic that was a bit difficult to argue, and since the German and Danish blood runs through my veins as well, let's just say more than enough thyme was acquired and leave it at that. With herb plants in hand and the new garden coming together beautifully, the pixies proceeded to construct fairy houses, just in case tiny bewinged folk needed a place to live. It turns out that construction of fairy houses is not as simple as constructing a house for pixies, as you rarely see a contractor hot gluing his 2x4s in place as he's framing a wall, or having his crew foraging for just the right bark to skin his walls and mosses for his doors, all the while nursing small glue burns with pieces of fresh aloe. And because construction is so complex, the project took multiple days to complete, which I must say is still an impressive timing for any construction project. The tiny houses were then snugged into the thyme garden, and the addition of fairy lights were added as an extra incentive to the fairy folk to make the fairy garden their home. Nobody knows if they like tiny lights, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. And now we watch and wait. But while we awaited the arrival of the fairy persons, I thought it a good plan to learn as much about thyme's story and its uses as we could, particularly since we are now practically a part of the thyme aristocracy with our abundance of the little herb. And much like basil, it turns out thyme had a rather interesting tale to weave across the multiple continents and millennia. It all began with the ancient Greeks, as far as the Greeks were concerned, who embraced the little plant, naming it Thymos, which meant courage and strength. And as we know, the ancient Greeks prized both of these attributes highly. They used the wild thyme to perfume their temples and in their baths to increase courage, and Dioscorides, a Greek physician, prescribed the herb in everything from concoctions to treat lung issues such as asthma, to blood clots and swelling, even recommending to mix thyme with wine and polenta for hip pain. We are uncertain whether this should have been eaten or applied, but either way, one cannot accuse Dioscorides of lacking in creativity in his medical practice. Hippocrates, known as the father of Western medicine, declared thyme to be a remedy for all respiratory diseases and conditions. The Romans were equally as passionate about the humble little herb as they consumed thyme before and after every meal, just in case there was a poison in their food. Which naturally leads to the question, was everyone worried they would be poisoned at every meal? And was food poisoning a common occurrence, or is this how you took care of your neighbor when he got on your very last nerve? We have questions. Suffice to say, there may have been more to the fall of Rome than meets the eye. Whatever the reasoning, the Romans even went as far as to declare that baths filled with thyme would expunge any remaining poison you had not removed by the previous method, as well as increase natural vigor. Good to know. Because of the rampant fear of poisoning, on so many levels, I assume, the Romans cultivated thyme extensively, which was necessary because they also used thyme in just about everything else as well. They flavored their cheeses with the aromatic little leaf, their meals, and of course included it in their alcoholic beverages, because they were Roman. Pliny the Elder declared it excellent for curing a headache when mixed with vinegar and applied to the temples and forehead, and if mixed with oil and sprinkled on wool, the wearer would find relief in joint disease, among other things. And if you were bitten by a venomous serpent or scorpion, which we assume was hiding in a bit of basil, thyme was the answer. So beloved was the little herb that the Roman army used thyme to decrease fatigue and increase strength and courage in battle, and marched across Europe with their pots of thyme, where they introduced their favorite herb to a new audience on the British Isles. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, the Egyptians had long been using thyme in their embalming process, though to be honest, I'm not sure if there's an herb or spice they didn't use at this point. In Britain, it was decided that thyme was indeed a symbol of courage, valor, and energy, as well as a panacea for diseases of all kinds. During the days of chivalry, ladies would often embroider a bee hovering over a sprig of thyme onto scarves, which would then be given to their preferred knight. And when the Black Plague of the Middle Ages ravaged the land, thyme was tucked into masks to ward off the disease, and sprigs of the fragrant herb were also tucked under pillows to help with a good night's sleep and ward against nightmares. Our old friend Culpepper, whose undue hatred for basil was eyebrow-raising, had a very different relationship with the herb thyme. He notes its benefits in healing respiratory diseases of all sorts, including whooping cough. During the First World War, thyme was even used to sanitize operating theaters, hospital wards, and wounds. And then there were the Germans and the Danes, who insisted that fairies lived beneath or near the wild thyme, and whose romantic and whimsical stories enchanted the Grimm brothers, leading to their collection of fairy tales, which upon completion was introduced to the rigorous Victorians, who were longing for the gentler times pre-industrialization. The Victorians adored the tales and set off on vigils to catch the fairy folk in their comings and goings, and ostensibly to prove their existence or not. We'll leave you to decide if they were successful one way or the other. As far as the golden pixie is concerned, anything is possible, and tiny humans with wings are an interesting notion which needs to be examined before being rejected. While our thyme is busy being utilized as a fairy honey trap, my expectations for the little herb vary slightly from those of the pixies. Modern research has substantiated much of the ancients' ideas concerning thyme in some way or another, although to my knowledge the wine and polenta hip compress trials have yet to find funding. Odd. Scientists have discovered that thyme has a compound called thymol, which makes up 20 to 60% of the herb's oils, along with several additional compounds. Thymol is known to be able to destroy harmful organisms such as infectious bacteria. A study published in the International Journal of Food Microbiology implies that thymol can reduce bacterial resistance to common drugs, while researchers in Portugal showed the antimicrobial activity of thyme, even in low amounts, can be used as a natural preservative of foods, as it prevents common food-borne bacteria that cause illness. In a Polish study, thyme was discovered to be effective against resistant strains of Staphylococcus. And in Lisbon, Portugal, the extract of mastic thyme was found to protect people from colon cancer. Turkish scientists found that the wild thyme caused all-cell death for breast cancer cells, and in Italy, researchers found that thyme significantly heightened the destruction of Candida albicans fungus in the body. Tinctures of thyme have been studied for treating acne and been shown to have been more effective than benzoyl peroxide, which is currently the base ingredient for many acne care treatments and which has some questionable side effects potential. A Finnish doctor confirmed in a journal that fresh thyme in a little syrup could eliminate the symptoms of whooping cough in 2 or 3 days and expel the disease within 2 weeks, proving that Culpepper was onto something in his evaluation of thyme's use with pertussis. Thyme is still widely used in many products today, from sanitizers to cough syrups, which is in part why a bank of thyme holds such an appeal for those of us in the little house. As thyme is used in our own honey lemon thyme cough syrup, our fire cider, and our herbal hair infusion, and so on, as well as our bone broths and so much of our cooking. And while thyme is not difficult to grow, it does take a bit of planning. It prefers a warm, dry climate with rocky soil which drains well. The poor dears, it really made a wrong turn ending up in the humid, wet south with its clay soil. So to make our little herbs feel at home, we layered broken bricks and small branches and the like beneath their new layer of soil and tucked them in, whispering through their leaves that it was almost certainly just like the Mediterranean coast. And so far they believe me. They have happily made a home with their friends and spread out a bit. It's commonly advised that the best way to grow your own thyme is from seed, which can be mixed with sand to prevent overcrowding at 4 parts sand to 1 part seed, before sprinkling them into their pots or beds and covering them with a light layer of soil. They can also be rooted from cuttings and propagated by dividing the roots before the coldest weather sets in or in early spring. Protecting them from the cold with a heavy mulch will help prevent loss. They do best separated at least 8 inches, but 1 per square foot is a good rule of thumb. Thyme also loves tomatoes, potatoes, and cabbage in more than just a recipe, and makes a good companion plant for these and many herbs as well. So don't be afraid to grab a packet of thyme and try a planter or bed of your own. Meanwhile, the pixies are impatiently awaiting the arrival of Tinker Bell's relatives, who are very slow to arrive, which is not at all surprising, as we have a great deal of trouble with fairy timeliness in our little house. The Tooth Fairy never seems able to remember the pixie's address, and takes a leisurely week before the forgetful fairy in question awakens from a sound sleep one night in a panic and rushes to tuck guilt money beneath the pillows of the peacefully sleeping pixies, I assume. So while they continue their vigil, the pixies are learning to work with thyme and conjuring up a little culinary alchemy with a bit of help. In the little house, the ideal is always a full table. Whether it's simply our large family, our friends who become family, or new friends, it makes no difference. Preparing a meal is an artistic endeavor and an expression of endearment for the people we love. It's a place to shake off the cares of life and laugh or learn together, to share our thoughts and hear another's, to create not just nourishment, but connections. When my little sister and I were mere pixies ourselves, we hovered around our grandmother's legs like a loyal collie until someone had the foresight to lift us onto a stool so we could observe their magic. Both of my grandmothers were incredible cooks and expert-level hostesses. They passed on a legacy of love demonstrated in the simplest of meals or a fabulous dinner party. Their intentionality conveyed their love and care for those they prepared meals for, and even as tiny girls, we recognized this. If my sister and I awoke at either one of their homes, which was often the case, there were grapefruits topped with cherries and a sprinkle of sugar, or melons cut in tiny squares, as well as pancakes and bacon and eggs on plates set atop a warming cart or in a low oven. Slices of bread were spread with butter before they were filled with whatever filling was whipped up to prevent the sandwich from becoming soggy, and dinners were served at tables filled with laughter, the tinkling of glass, and conversation that challenged the mind. They were determined no one would starve on their watch. A meal was never just about the consuming of food. It was the warmth of companionship, and while no one passed up an invitation to sit at either of their tables, it was more about the atmosphere that turned something as ordinary to human existence as eating into something so much more. Arguably, one of my favorite places was to be sandwiched in between these dear tall people, all of whom I presumed were related to me in some way, as they wore the moniker aunt, uncle, or cousin, and listening to their conversation, their experiences, their thoughts on world affairs, and their problem solving. To listen to the constant laughter and camaraderie. Perhaps no other place held such rich opportunity for learning, not just facts, but how to conduct oneself, to relate to others, and to value family and friends. What if we turned back the clock in our own homes and partook of our evening meals together, and in an atmosphere that blocks out the noise and engulfs us with peace? If we whipped up a bit of magic in our own kitchens, broke out our favorite dishes, and slowed down our eating with conversation and gratitude. I suspect we all need a bit of respite from the craziness of the world, a place to find laughter and to share our hearts, a place to unburden. I can certainly imagine, at the very least, our digestion would be greatly improved, and our relationship with food might even be redefined. The Pixies are learning to value these traits of slowing down and embracing the moments, and in creating something magical of their own in the kitchen, to be served and enjoyed with the people that they love. The legacy of love continues into the next generation when we are intentional. Our time is often the most precious gift that we can give, and while the herb itself has been used for millennia to cure, soothe, and add flavor, it's also a bit of a reminder that time is fleeting, and filling each moment with intentionality is priceless. We continue to anticipate the wee winged folks' arrival along our bank of time, and should they make an appearance, we shall certainly let you know. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you will like the video and subscribe to our channel. If you would like to be notified when we release a new video, please click the bell icon. See you next time.